So, if you clicked on this video because of the thumbnail, let me just assure you that was absolutely meant as clickbait. However, do not click off just yet because the fact of the matter is Israel must overcome and triumph in this conflict. But you need to hear why. Now, before I begin, let me just preface this entire video by saying a few things. Some of the videos being shown with the destruction of Gaza and the obvious lives lost. Look, I am in no way condoning what has been done or what will be done. I do not support any corruption within Israel or Palestine for that matter. But if you're foolish enough to believe that everything you're being told on the mainstream news is the honest and unbiased truth, well, let's just say I got a bridge for sale and it's going cheap just for you. Now, the second thing I need to point out, and don't click off just yet, even if you want to, but it's my belief in prophecy, in the prophecy of the Bible, and how I believe without a shadow of a doubt its validity. Now, here's why. And if this is the only thing that you get from this video, this is it. Now, depending on who you ask, there are over 2,500 prophecies foretold within the Bible. In the last 6,000 years, about 2,000 have been fulfilled, with about 500 to go. Most of these prophecies are highly detailed, and yet every single one fulfilled has been exact and to the word. No approximations or people saying, well, yeah, that's about right. Not at all. The only way this is possible is if the Bible inspiration came from outside of time. A very hard concept to perhaps accept in this world and in this body, but consider the odds. Let's say 10 things I told you came true. Maybe it's Florida State University crushes Miami and the Gators for the next 2 years. Go Seminoles. And if I gave you the final scores of every game and they were 100% true, look, you're apt to believe my next prediction, correct? I should hope so. So when I tell you 2,000 detailed prophecies have been fulfilled with another 500 to go, would it at least be a good idea to consider what those 500 are to maybe get a sense of what is to come? So despite popular belief, Israel is a big deal to God. And I know some of you have bought into the idea that God is done with Israel. Well, if you get to the end of this video and you still believe that wholeheartedly, well, I'm just going to say you are at risk because what I'm showing you has very little room for outside interpretation. Now, the book of Revelation ties both the Old and New Testaments of the Bible together with everything coming to a crescendo and the return of Jesus standing on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. One of the biggest prophecies yet to be fulfilled. But to understand a little more of the history of Israel, I look to Matthew 24:2, where Jesus said, "Do you see all these things?" he asks. "Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." Now here Jesus was referring to the Jewish temple and how the Romans would tear this down, which eventually did happen in 70 AD, which indeed was prophecy fulfilled. And as a result of this siege of 70 AD, Israel basically ceased as a nation, which again, there are many verses that talk about Israel being scattered all over the world. Now, here's an interesting factoid. Any time in history that this has happened where a nation is conquered, those people get absorbed and assimilate into the new regime that takes over. Or people move and again, assimilate into whatever culture. But not the Jews. For 2,000 years, they have held fast to their culture, passing it on from generation to generation. Now, that is until 1948, when Israel became a nation again. Now, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, and I'll get into those details, but just pause and consider the fact that no nation taken over has ever come back. And yet, there's now a country called Israel. Now, before everyone gives themselves an aneurysm, we really need to go to the Bible to see what it says about Israel. And to do this, we look at Ezekiel 36, starting in verse 6. Although all of 36 refers to Israel's restoration. Therefore prophesy concerning the land of Israel, and say to the mountains and hills, in the ravines and valleys, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I speak in my jealous wrath because you, Israel, have suffered the scorn of the nations. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I swear with uplifted hand that the nations around you will also suffer scorn. And what do we see with all the nations surrounding Israel even right now? Are they in good shape? Not really. Moving on. But you, mountains of Israel, will produce branches and fruit for my people Israel, for they will soon come home. I am concerned for you and will look on you with favor. You will be plowed and sown, and I will cause many people to live on you. Yes, all of Israel. The towns will be inhabited and the ruins rebuilt. I will increase the number of people and animals living on you, and they will be fruitful and become numerous. I will settle people on you as in the past and will make you prosper more than before. Then you will know that I am the Lord. I will cause people, my people Israel, to live on you. They will possess you, and you will be their inheritance. You will never again deprive them of their children. Now, this is talking about what a prosperous nation Israel was, the apple of God's eye. And we know how prosperous Israel was. It was the land of milk and honey. But let's jump to verse 17, which says, Son of man, when the people of Israel were living in their own land, they defiled it by their conduct and their actions. Their conduct was like a woman's monthly uncleanliness in my sight. So I poured out my wrath on them because they had shed blood in the land and because they had defiled it with their idols. I dispersed them amongst the nations. See that? And they were scattered through the countries. I judged them according to their conduct and their actions. And wherever they went among the nations, they profaned my holy name. For it was said of them, these are the Lord's people, and yet they had to leave this land. I had concern for my holy name, which the people of Israel profaned among the nations, where they had gone. So here we are. God was upset with Israel, and judgment fell on Israel. The people were scattered for their sin. But now watch what happens starting in verse 22. This is what the sovereign Lord says, it is not for your sake, people of Israel, that I am going to do these things, but for the sake of my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations where you have gone. I will show the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, the name you have profaned among them. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the sovereign Lord, when I am proved holy through you before their eyes. Now, when I read these verses, it describes to me just how important honor is to God. And more importantly, God brings judgment to those that profane his name. Now, you can argue this one with me, but didn't we see this with that comedian claiming how much Jesus loved her because she took the whole schedule of shots? She delivered her punchline, which was just a blasphemous decree spitting in God's face. And next thing you know, she hits the floor. And just recently, some Turkish lawmaker decrees Israel will suffer the wrath of Allah. And immediately he drops from a heart attack. Look, argue all you want, but you've been warned, people. Judgment will come either now or later. Now, this is where everyone, including the naysayers, we need to look at Ezekiel 37, the prophecy of the valley of the dry bones. Now, I highly recommend you read the entire chapter, but for the sake of this video, let's just look at verses 7 and 8. So I, Ezekiel, prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Now, the bones are Israel becoming a nation once again. And look, I'm not making this up, because if we read verses 11 and 12, it says clearly, then God said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I, God, will bring you back to the land of Israel. God says it clearly that He is the one that brings them back to the land. And we need to look at one little detail as we read in verse 8. There was no breath in them, which means that the Jews occupy the land, but in unbelief of the true God. In fact, we know that right now they cannot wait to build this third temple for their Messiah. But Scripture tells us that the Messiah they embrace is the Antichrist. And it isn't until the midpoint of the tribulation, or Daniel's 70th week, that the Jews realize this guy they embrace isn't the Messiah. And then finally, they will see. And let's jump to verse 14, which says, I, God, will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord. Do you see it? God said clearly in the Bible that He would restore Israel as a nation, not because of anything that Israel did, but solely because of His name. This is how seriously God sees a covenant agreement, and His original agreement with Abraham. It's not to be broken. And if the nation of Israel won't do right by God, God will still honor His covenant originally made with Abraham. And if we continue even further, Ezekiel 38 speaks of a war with Israel where all the surrounding nations attack Israel, and no one is there to save them. Look at what happens starting in verse 21. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares the sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. I will execute judgment on him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur on him and on his troops, and on the many nations with him. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Very scary if you're not with Him. Look, by this time, it will be clear that it is God that comes to the rescue, and not because of Israel turning and worshiping God, but more so to lift the veil from Israel's eyes and to show the rest of the world who the God of the universe is. Folks, this will happen. You don't have to agree or even necessarily understand the entirety of why this is happening. But after so many prophecies being fulfilled, and the likelihood of the last few being fulfilled, such as this one, it's going to happen. Even if all you do is look at Ezekiel 36:24, which says, for I will take you out of the nations. I will gather you from all countries and bring you back into your land. Look, while this has been going on for years, we've seen Jews coming back to Israel. Look, when this whole thing got going on October 7th, what happened? People didn't run from Israel, but so many Jews ran to Israel. And you can try and say that this is just happenstance, but look, folks, this is exactly how God works. So I've said on this channel before, you need to be on the right side of this. But why? because not just some of Scripture, but all of Scripture is true. Genesis 12:3 says, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you, Israel. Psalms 122:6 says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure. And perhaps most importantly, Matthew 25. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people, one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. And then we see what happens to the goats in verse 41. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Look, think about this. Those who call themselves Christian and won't support Israel, when you are before your Creator in judgment, how do you explain justifying being against the very thing that God says throughout Scripture is precious to him? And while you might say, well, I'm not against Israel, I'm just not for it. Look, I assure you, there is no gray area. That's it, folks. Look, that's my word of the day. And as we approach these truly last days and last minutes, it reminds me of Matthew 24, verse 9 and 10. And you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Did this video offend you? Because if it really did, well, look, pass it on and please go offend some more people. But realize that chances are you're offended because you're the goat. That said, please like this video as it helps get this out to the masses. And if you haven't yet and you think I'm actually worth it, please subscribe and make sure the notifications are turned on. And folks, I hope to see you all next year.